Crazy or freeform quilting is a good technique for beginners to learn as it doesn't require precision sewing like most quilting techniques. There's no set pattern to follow, so you get to focus on being creative and having fun. It's also a wonderful way to practice basic sewing skills such as using a sewing machine to stitch a straight seam. In this video, I'll show you how to crazy or freeform piece on a paper foundation. In less than an hour, you'll have a block that you can use on a greeting card. To complete this project, you'll need basic sewing supplies, a few scraps of fabric, paper, and a greeting card. Depending on your style, you might want to also add extra trim such as ribbon and lace. A copy of the supply list can be downloaded at learnhowtoquilt.com under Small Projects or under Beginner Basics, Crazy or Freeform Quilting. You can make your own card like this, or I've purchased these cards at a craft store. They were made for photographs, but I use them to frame my sewing project. You can also find these online. When choosing fabric for this project, you'll want to look for small scale prints or solids. You can use large scale prints, but just be aware that when you cut it up like this, you'll lose most of the design, which might not be a bad thing, as this could be the look that you desire. Sometimes I like to use a focal fabric or a picture as a guide for choosing fabrics. Other times I'll go to my scrap bag and pick colors that I like, or maybe that reflect the time of the season or the mood that I'm in. This project is perfect to use memento fabric, such as fabric from a favorite shirt or maybe a section from a baby's blanket. Perhaps the easiest and craziest way to choose fabric is just to close your eyes and pull a random piece out of piles of scraps. I think I make the best pieces this way. Whatever fabric you decide to use, make sure it's been pressed before sewing. If you have no scraps, then you'll need to buy 1/8 of a yard of 3 to 4 different fabrics. With 1/8 of a yard, you'll have more than enough fabric to make one card. To get started, you'll need the paper for your foundation. The paper foundation needs to be a little bit larger than the card's window. The paper you use for your foundation can just be regular copy paper. This blue is actually regular copy paper, but I'm using blue so you can see better. It's easiest to use paper that's a little bit heavier. So this green makes it much easier. It's a little bit heavier, it has a little bit more body. It makes it easier to slide in here, but it's not necessary. I do advise against using cardboard, even if it's thin, because this is a little bit too difficult to sew on. Here's my card. I'll mark here, here, and here, and then I'll draw lines. Now this is the size of my card, but I need to make it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to take off about 1/2 of an inch. Put my line here and 1/2 of an inch here. How I'm measuring this is I'm using my ruler, and the 1/2 inch mark I'm putting right there. Once again, it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'll cut this. Here's my completed paper foundation. For a card this size, I like to use 3 to 5 different fabrics. I'm using 100% cotton fabrics, but any type of fabric will work. Just be aware that you have to press the fabric before cutting and after sewing. If you place a cotton strip next to a polyester strip, it will be more difficult to press as they both require different heat setting. To prepare my fabric for piecing, I need to have at least one straight edge on my fabric. This edge will help guide me to sew straight lines. I like to use my rotary cutter for the straight edge, but you can use a ruler and scissors to draw the line on your fabric as I've done here, and you would just cut that line out with your scissors. Some of these pieces have already been cut as they're leftovers from other projects. I'd like to use this fabric in my project, so let me cut off a strip, about 1.5 inches wide would be appropriate for this card. I'm not going to measure 1.5 inches precisely or be concerned about trimming this edge here. All I need is one straight edge, and I'll get that with my ruler here. I could slant it like this, or I actually prefer just to cut straight across. Now this side of the fabric has one straight edge. I also like to cut the length of my fabric. Here's my fabric, and to go across this card it would need to be this long. If I cut it exactly the size of this card, then when I try to put it on an angle, I'll be short on each end. So I like to add about, let's say, about an inch on each end. Doesn't have to be perfect. There. So with this longer piece, I can tilt it at different angles and it will still cover my card. Before I go over to the sewing machine, I like to have my pieces cut and ready to go. Often I'll cut more than one piece because I like to play around with these and get an idea of where I'm going to put the different pieces before I get over to the sewing machine. You might notice that I have the selvage on this piece. Usually I would have that cut off before I go to sew, but on freeform or crazy quilting, it's okay because anything goes. If I find a design that I like, then I take a picture to help guide me when I'm over at the sewing machine. But it's not necessary to do this. I like to start in the middle and work my way out to each end, but it's okay to start at the top or at the bottom. Here's my first fabric. I place it on the foundation with the right side up facing me and the wrong side down against the paper. I could pin this in place, but I find it easiest just to hold it there with my finger. I'll use this fabric next. I think it looks good. Maybe like that. So in order to sew these two together, I have to put right sides together. So I'll flip this over and I'll pin it in place. When sewing, you'll want to use a neutral color thread and a regular stitch length. I'm using red so you can see my stitches. Your seam allowance will be determined by the width of your foot. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine. It's okay if you have another size foot. You just need to make sure that the edge of your fabric is lined up with the edge of your foot. I'll be following the edge, the straight edge on this fabric that's on the top. Take the pins out, and you want to make sure you're sewing a straight seam all the way to the end. You pull that out and show you what that looks like. Every time you add a piece, you need to press before you go any further. You want all of your seams lying flat on your foundation. Don't worry about this extra fabric on the sides. This will get trimmed later. Here's my next piece. I can add it on the bottom or I can add it up on top. I think I like it best here. I'm looking at this piece and I notice this edge isn't straight, so I want to turn this around. I need at least one straight edge to follow, so I'm going to use this straight edge here. I think I want this at an angle. I'll turn it. I think that looks good. In order to sew these sections together, I have to have right sides together. These pieces I can't flip. So this one I'll turn and flip down. I could pin it like I did before, but I really don't like to use pins. I'm just going to use my hands to hold on to that and get these spreads. I'm sewing this straight seam using the edge of my foot here. And let's look at that. I like to trim away this excess. From time to time you'll end up with extra fabric in here. To trim that out, I'll fold down, take this paper, fold it away so it doesn't get caught in there. I like to just take my scissors. I could use my rotary ruler, cutter and mat, but when I'm sitting down next to the machine, it's just as easy for me to use my scissors. Take this over to my pressing board and press. I'm ready to add my next fabric. This edge is not a straight edge, so I don't want to be following that edge. I'll have to follow this edge here. Flip that over and want to make sure that I can see that edge when I take it over to the sewing machine. I don't have hardly anything to trim, so I'm not going to worry about trimming now. Fold that back and I'll take that over to the press. Now I'm ready for my last piece. Both of these are straight edges. I could just flip it over like this, or I could put it at an angle if I think it would look better at an angle. I'm not sure. But let's try it at this angle. Notice I flipped this over and I can see there's fabric under here, but over here there's no fabric. So this wouldn't work at this angle. So I need to readjust this, and I'll go back to just putting it against that edge, probably easiest. You don't want to make this too hard. And so I'll just sew that. I don't have anything to trim. I don't know if I really like it like that. There's a little section right here. I'm not sure. I kind of wanted it up a little bit higher. So that's okay. I can just put this back in the sewing machine. I'm following my stitch line. So that's my straight edge that I'm following. I'm not going to be able to trim because it's sewn, but that's okay. It's only about 1/2 of an inch in there. So let's pull this down. Oh yeah, I like that a little bit better. So let me take this over to the pressing board. I've covered my foundation with strips, and I want to trim off this excess. I could use my scissors, but I find it easiest just to use my rotary cutter. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is a little bit bigger than it needs to be, so if I cut some of that off, that's okay. I just go around trimming the edge. Here's my completed card. If I wanted to add extras, now's the time. I could put trim, just fool with it and see what you like. I like this one the best. I could sew that on by machine, or I can use a glue stick to glue it in place, since this is just going to be on the card. Hope you enjoy making your cards. Please share our videos with your friends. For more crazy or freeform quilting ideas, visit learnhowtoquilt.com, click on Beginner Basics, and go to Crazy or Freeform Quilting.